And who knows what you have come, and who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. So this is the story of Esther, who became the queen, and then her cousin Mordecai raised to her what he'd heard about a plot to kill all the Jews. So he comes to her and asks her to do something, to go to the king and say, I've heard this, can you do something about it? But just by going to the king, she potentially could be killed. So this is what he says to her about, you need to do it anyway. So part of what we're sort of been thinking about in terms of our own reflection, discernment of wisdom for the future, is that we think about what is for PNP such a time as this? What does that call us to? How do we think through what that might look like? So we're starting a bit of a process around that. Jamie will talk more about that. So let me lead you in a word of prayer for the process as well. Let's pray. Our God, we come to you to start off a time of reflection, a time of seeking wisdom and discernment from you. We pray that you can help us to think through what a time as this means for PNP, how we can move forward. We ask for you to give a blessing to Jamie as he leads us in this process and kicks it off today. We pray that all of us who are part of it can contribute both during this process, but also in the way we do our work every day. Help us to envision what such a time as this might mean for PNP. In Jesus' name, amen. James.
Thank you, Harry. Just a couple of quick reflections on that passage from Esther. It's really interesting. Esther didn't actually sort of seek out the calling that was placed upon her. She found herself in a situation where she was actually distanced from the needs of her people because she was in a life of privilege. She was in a place of honor and a place of affluence, a place of great protection. And it took an ambassador to bring the realities of her people to her attention. And then she had a fundamental responsibility. What was she going to do with it? And it, not unlike with Moses, who had been with his people, but then at, I think 3 months was pushed into a basket and into the arms of the royal family. As he got older, he started to realize he was living a life of privilege and entitlement, and yet his new people were preying upon and enslaving his native people, and he had a choice. Does he stay and side and enjoy the privileges of Pharaoh's court, or does he side with his people? I think it's interesting that PNP plays a unique role. Sort of like Mordecai, we see the realities on the ground. We see the needs that are happening of the children of God around the world who are suffering in harm's way. And we have a role and a responsibility of bringing that back to the attention of people who are in positions of power and influence and affluence, and to try and engage them and spark something in their hearts that would call them to engage. So this morning we're, reflecting a bit on the changing context of needs around the world, and trying to discern, as there are changes going on in the partnership, as there are changes going on in the planet, what is it that PNP is particularly responsible for, and what do we have the opportunity to lay hold of to bring some increased measure of life in all its fullness to bear on behalf of the world's vulnerable children. So as we look at this morning, we're kickstarting something where we're engaging in a consultation with the LT to kind of reflect upon how we can become uniquely positioned as thought and action leaders, contributing to World Vision Canada, the partnership, and also helping play a lead or catalytic role within the international humanitarian and development sector, both here and abroad, and ultimately, as mentioned, help contribute to life in all its fullness for children. So the DLT is going to be gathering today, tomorrow, to do some vision casting together, to reflect on the opportunities at hand. And our goal in this process is really to unearth a more clearly articulated vision, value proposition, as well as start to over the next few months start to unlock some new strategies or adapted structure or systems that will support where we see God calling us to go, allowing us to start to harvest those first fruits of that calling during FY18. And this morning we're going to, in a little bit, invite you to help us kickstart some of that process. As I've shared with the team, I don't want this to be something that we sort of go away and come down with tablets of stone and say, here it is. It's going to be a bit more iterative. We want to take in the feedback that we've received already about some of the aspirations and callings and understandings of where you'd like to go. This morning, catch a bit more of that. Take that, reflect on it, reflect on some of the other things that we've had brought forward, and sort of meld this together into what we feel is that specific call for such a time as this. So what are some of the sort of reflection points here as you see on the screen? Sort of the changing contexts, both in the field and in the marketing context. There are different emerging realities and needs that are affecting the world's children, and we're being called in this season to particularly the world's most vulnerable. So how do we go about that? How do we sort of gear ourselves appropriately for that? How do we build on our strengths? I look at the fact that we do have thought leaders in this room and action leaders. As I look around, I think in the whole sector, as I've engaged with other organizations, as I read up, as I engage in meetings with people from Global Affairs or USAID or groups like Grand Challenges or just across the sector, and then I look and see we have incredible riches here of people who have invested their careers in this calling of seeking life in all its fullness, and have developed particular competencies and capacities. But in some ways I feel like there's so much hidden within that you go about doing your work, but if you could, in a sense, strap on a body cam, you could show people, wow, what does it look like to be on the front lines of advocacy, engaging with government officials, to move them from one place to another, or corporate actors, to take them from a place of maybe relative unconcern about some of these issues, or a concern but no real cognition about what to do about child labor in supply chains, and how you help them move on that journey. Or you could look at how do you go into fragile contexts and help stand with people who are suffering in ways that can move the needle from suffering and oppression and exploitation over to survival, and hopefully ultimately even into thriving. How do we really dream big about the possibilities? In many ways, I feel like because we keep some of this to ourselves, or we're not as intentional about how do we go out there, we might limit the contribution that we're making to the space. So let's unlock our thinking. Let's kind of broaden the parameters of our imagination of what is it that we really have to shake this whole place up here, and shake up the sector, and really lean into it and lead in new ways. Of course, commensurate with that, there are certain things that we're going to have to lay aside and say, this really isn't, it maybe was critical to getting us to where we are, but it may not be instrumental to where we want to go. And then what sort of synergies can we unlock within our team and then across with marketing and our other partners in this organization within this organization and outside, to catalyze a broader movement for the well-being of children. This doesn't come out of nowhere. There are certainly some guiding frameworks that we're all familiar with. with Our Promise 2030, I love that it's our promise for the world's vulnerable children. And if anyone is just joining us on WebEx, if you wouldn't mind muting yourself, that'd be great. You can't mute me. Well, maybe you can just walk away. But, so Our Promise 2030 really informs us about how we're going to prioritize, where we're going to go, where we're going to de-emphasize, and then Orange Book really is in sync with that. So we know that there are new impulses, new movements to deepen our commitment to the world's most vulnerable children, to focus our ministry for greater results, to collaborate and advocate for broader impact, speaks to partnerships and new ways of engaging in the space and the sector, delivering high quality, sustainable funding, and living out our Christian faith with Christian faith and calling of boldness and humility. So within our own Orange Book, we have a goal to be the focused and trusted leader in our sector, to offer best solutions to improve children's lives. And we know that Michael's called us to a new reorientation of being face-to-face with Canadians, back-to-back with supporting our field colleagues and shoulder-to-shoulder with one another within World Vision Canada, with our partners outside the organization as well. Beyond this, there are some inputs that really fuse together to help give us some bearings as well. We won't be driven by any one of these things, but they're sort of like a constellation that we can kind of get our bearings by navigating through the channel through these different markers. So our voice really gave some feedback, particularly around leadership and vision casting. It's become clear that I have not done a great job at articulating what is it that P&P has to contribute in this time, in this space. We know that we've been asked to lay aside certain things. We're phasing away from more hands-on tactical engagement and quality control and moving to more of a strategic portfolio level of engagement and contribution. There are some other things where if left unarticulated, we could think, this kind of checks the heart and soul of programs and policy for us, our contribution of our expertise into the battle if we're just a fundraising organization. I think the reality is, if we want to help the organization fulfill its mandate of raising the resources that we need, we actually can up our contribution in terms of bringing our technical expertise and prowess, our insights to bear, but articulating it in ways that capture the imagination and ignite people to want to give, not only of their financial resources, but of their voice and lending their influence into the work. Marketing and development. We know that the changes in marketing really, we can't, sometimes people say, well, we're always changing, we're always reorging, we're always restructuring, we're always doing this. When is it going to stop? And I don't have an answer for you, because we're a complex organism in times where we have to adapt. You have to adapt or change. The dinosaurs maybe didn't adapt, and that's why they're no longer with us. We want to ensure that we're kind of saying, okay, in this moment, what is it that we need to do? But for me, and I'll get to this a little bit later, but just a sneak peek, this is not for me so much about, looking at what can we cut as much as what can we contribute. I really want to be emphasizing, how do we optimize our contribution? What is it that we can lay a hold of for the whole organization that will help move us forward in support of Orange Book and Our Promise? And in doing that, we may need to reposition and repurpose certain roles and goals and objectives. And so there may be changes in what we do, but I'm far more looking at how do we adapt to take advantage of what's in front of us, rather than looking at, what do we downscale or downsize, though we will have to look at those things as well. Then we have the value chain analysis. A couple waves of the value chain analysis. Now, the upshot of it is that we actually largely came out quite good in the value chain in terms of how we're allocating our resources according to what the partnership wants. Michael does want to have us walk through him, sort of everything that each person is doing within our team and how we're contributing to Orange Book and to our promise. And so I don't think that's anything we need to be, afraid of. I think we can, with boldness, say, here's what we have to offer, here's what we think, here's what was, and here's where we would like to see us move forward. We also know that the Government of Canada has changed over recent years, and their prioritization and their focus and emphasis have changed. MNCH, the Muskoka Initiative was huge, and there's some legacy there. But this government is, we know with the feminist international assistance policy, the focus on gender, the focus on SRHR, sexual reproductive health and rights, has new demands and a new impetus that we need to be, again, responsive to. Again, I don't think we want to be reactive or reactionary to any one of these things, but informed by all of them, navigate our way through and say, okay, in light of all of these things, as well as the IP peer review, which we just came through, that looks at, what are some of the donor promise and fiduciary accountability pieces that need to be highlighted and brought to bear, that informed by all of that, we kind of take a pause, reflect, and say, okay, so this impulse would like to see this would like to see this would like to see this. What's sort of the Venn diagram overlap that we can say, actually, in light of all this, here's what we think our contribution is. So rather than being passive and reactive, we want to be responsive but proactive and lean in and say, here's what we think we have to offer. As we've reflected on this, we also had brought Clayton Rowe in to kind of look at some of where we were at, some of these different inputs, to give us another vantage point or view into what is the partnership telling us, what are other parties and partners telling us. And he helped us see in a clear way that we used to be asked as P&P to lead on the impact piece. That was front and center, that was core to our mandate. It was about quality assurance, it was about ensuring that we would have evidence of impact from the field realities. And while we're not losing it or losing sight of it, it's about a different flow, and our theory of change now is more that we're starting with influence. We want to influence the government, corporations, and the public to support child well-being by being thought and action leaders, and of course leveraging the impact from the field and the stories from the field. But we're starting from a place of how do we position ourselves to help influence? Again, like Mordecai or Esther, seeing the realities of our people, these children around the world, how do we bring those realities to bear to influence power brokers to ensure that they're moving things in support of child well-being? And then as we bring that influence to bear, we're making asks. We're making asks for policy change, but we're making asks also for financial investment, whether it's through grants, whether it's through gifts in kind, whether it's through sponsorship dollars, whether it's through the private non-sponsorship, programmatic gifts. We're really just standing up, saying, here are the needs, and we have ways to help address these challenges. Invest with us so that we can make there a more just world for children and communities living in the context of poverty around. And then that we contribute that to the partnership, and we have our strategic level of engagement, ensuring appropriate resource planning and disseminating our impact. So we're capturing the evidence of that impact. We've got an eye on it, though it's principally a partnership responsibility. We still have strategic levels of engagement, and it's sort of trust, but verify, right? The old term that Ronald Reagan spoke that's maybe slightly less popular than tear down that wall. So we've got a few things right, whatever else. And I think that that's the reality is we are in a place where we've been mandated, let's not be in the kitchen of what the field is doing. Let's sort of be providing the supply trucks so that they can have the resources to prepare the meals to deliver the impact that's there. So, as we engage in this, we really want to wrestle with this. And we've got a time now for us to delve in a little bit deeper. But we've got about 30 minutes in front of us. So what I want to do is a couple of things. First, I just want to pause, get a temperature check, kind of get your initial reactions to this. I mean, you asked us to, hey, start generating ideas and think through how can you lead us into new ways. So I want to get some of your sense of that and what's resonating with you, what would you like to wrangle with a little bit, any tough questions you want to pose that you feel are critical for moving this process forward. Try and keep it in the context of what we're talking about here. And depending upon how long that goes, we can either at this point, shortly, maybe in 15, 20 minutes, shift into a deeper level of actioning out some of this, and I'll bring Harry back up for that. Or we can save that for another point of check-in. We'll definitely get to that, but I don't want to short circuit this time. Let me just say, this also needs to be tied into one other thing that I was just giving reflection. How many of you were able to hear what Starlight Runner was sharing from their findings and from the research project that they've been doing over the last year? Were there a few of you, anyone in the room a bit with Starlight Runner? I thought there was a couple of you. Okay.
Yeah.
Some of you have heard also about the brand, the brand framework. So there's a few things coming out of it. Now I just have the draft guidance in front of me. But I just want to give you a sense that, of course, we don't do this in isolation, but we do it in partnership with our marketing colleagues. And some of the things that they're unpacking for us, again, these were draft language, but things like our brand promise, so we need to be informed by these sort of organizing principles. If we only worked in safe places, if we only helped people who agreed with us, fear would win over love. We would fail to achieve life in all its fullness for every child. But we are not afraid. We believe diligence, faith, love, and hope will make us successful. Together, we will work to improve the lives of vulnerable children all over the world. There's a brand archetype that they're talking about, which is a caregiver sage, which basically talks about being motivated by love, being empowering and serving and nurturing the children in those contexts and in those communities. But as sort of a sage, a wise mentor, those who have kind of been in the thick of the battle and can come alongside to help and champion, to pursue truth, to ensure effective action. So I think some of that fits in with the thought and action leader. Again, there's some aspects around there about who do you position when you market to Canadians as heroes in this story. And for me, I think ultimately it should be the child and the community that are the protagonists, that are those who are championing this. But in a way, we want everyone, I guess, to see themselves as protagonists in the story, not bystanders, but those who can do whatever they can to write themselves into helping in the midst of this story. And so that's a part of what we're trying to do, is draw people into that. And the brand personality of being loving, brave, and effective. So those are some of those things that we're trying to do. In the elevator speech, again, sort of a draft, is driven by Jesus' love for us. We join with Canadians to help improve the lives of the most vulnerable children by working with families, communities, and partners to create sustainable solutions to overcome some of their biggest challenges. So I'm going to pause there and just kind of open it up. What things spring to mind for you as we embark on this process? I realize there's, as you give that some thought, there's one thing that I was meant to share, kind of an idea of how, like just framing out one way in which we could seize upon our ability to influence in the sector as thought and action leaders. So let me start with this, and then as you think through your questions or interjections, we'll go there. One of the things that I thought where we're sort of underweight or underplaying what we could have to offer is in the area of education. So education, as I understand it, is our second largest programmatic spend through our sponsorship initiatives and through our programmatic activities globally. But we're not known as an action leader or a thought leader in the education space, except maybe in a few narrow areas. People don't look to us as a go-to in that space. But in recent months, we've had occasion, it's been interesting to see a lot of different things coming together where we've been in conversations because of Jennifer Slawich's engagement on the SIPWIG. It's a policy working group around education. We've had other people kind of bringing some thoughts to bear. We've been invited to the table to help influence the Canadian government to invest in education through the Global Partnership for Education and some other initiatives to say we need to prioritize it. If children don't get the educational inputs, they're not going to be able to achieve life in all its fullness. We've also been invited to different conversations about children in emergencies and looking and saying, look, our investment in Jordan is critical. We were just invited to attend a Governor General hosted state dinner or state luncheon for the King of Jordan, and we were actually at the kind of the table right front and center next to Prime Minister Trudeau's table, as at really I think at the King of Jordan's request we were present, and it largely we have this role in education in Jordan where we're ministering to Jordanian children as well as Syrian refugee children, recognizing that children are in conflict or on the run are staying 17 to 20 years displaced from their home communities. So that's an entire generation, that's your entire formative and developmental and educational years. That's wiped away from them if we don't have ways to lean in. Well, we're doing great work in Jordan where we're looking at having a ribbon cutting ceremony in the new year where we'll have the Canadian ambassador to Jordan present to look at how we're opening a whole wing of a high school so that girls can get an education, a secondary education. So we're doing some things that are unprecedented for us or leading the way, but we're not necessarily known for that. So how can we pull that together, given the fact that we've got great connections with Karen Ord, we've got Nancy Delcole is 3/4 of her time is being on loan to the Global Center. There's a lot around gender in education. There's disability issues. USAID, the last couple of weeks I've been in conversation with them. They're looking at, because they have all children reading, where World Vision US is right in the thick of things with USAID and AusAid, they're saying, hey, what about Canada? Could you guys get in the game? So it's looking at an opportunity like that to say, instead of education being something of an afterthought, because in the grant space, maybe the government of Canada doesn't necessarily fund it the same way because it's not a federal thing. Well, I had a conversation earlier this week in Vancouver with a former provincial minister of education, saying, how do we see what are the drivers and the impetus for provincial governments to contribute to the education space? So can we pull that together to contribute more broadly into the space? Give one other quick example about a way that we could leverage some of the great work that we're doing by opening it up, by live streaming it, open sourcing it. So we had interesting meetings in Ottawa with the Minister of Defense was there, former Lieutenant General Romeo Dallaire, Senator was there, a former child soldier from, I believe, South Sudan was speaking, and we were convening and hosting this meeting, and there were probably about 50 to 70 thought leaders, bureaucrats, people in the sector who were participating in this conversation. But it was something where, wow, I think about people who want to support Raw Hope would be fascinated to know that we're engaged in these. What's the discussion? What's the nature of it? How can we bring them along in the journey so that they can have a front row seat into how we're trying to influence and shape out these things? So let's not keep our light under a bushel. Let's let's put it on the lampstand. Let's get the torch out there so people can see what's going on, so they can come light their torches, and we can go in and light up the night. All right, pause there. That should have bought you a little bit of time to sharpen your questions. So, Merrick, did you want to start? You weren't looking like you wanted to, but I just thought, why not? You're a thoughtful man.
I think the whole process is it's a good process.
I'm sorry, could you come up here? I know that's going to make people go, oh, I'm definitely not asking anything. But just for the benefit of everyone here. Yeah.
I mean, the whole process is a good process, and we have to go through it. But I was asking myself if we can go one step back to on this one. I'm trying to understand why the third point, the two things are joined, like resource planning and impact. Whereas there is income in the second point, and I was thinking, why not the resource planning go with income? In a sense, saying we're not up to taking the money alone, but we are also on how effective we can use resources. So that was what I was trying to do.
Good. Yeah, I think it's a good point, and it's arguable that you could move resource planning up. I think part of it is, are we allocating, so you generate the resources, but then are you allocating it towards the things that have the greatest impact in support of what we want? Is it the right diversification of our portfolio? We've got 5 major areas that we're looking at. How are we prioritizing that? So I think that's a bit of where that comes in to tie it more tightly to impact. But yeah, it's a fair point. Yeah. Others, I think I saw Miriam.
I'm wondering if you think marketing sees PNP's value as a thought leader. Because sometimes I think there's always this pressure, continual pressure from our senior leaders, from the partnership, to be smaller, to give more money back to the field. If you're not bringing in income, sorry, your job is cut. Do you think that marketing in particular with the recent restructure sees us as a thought and action leader, and sees us in your recent examples as being able to be part of that influence that would bring in income that would have value?
Yeah, good question. I think that it's mixed. I think that there are some within marketing that would definitely see us as that, and I can call a couple of examples. Alana, for example, was invited to be present as they made one of the biggest pitches ever to a family foundation, and Vision Partners was essential. They said that it was critical to have Alana at the table. Alana, close your ears, your head's growing as we speak. As they made this very significant ask surrounding Raw Hope, and that was critical to actually leverage the amount of resources that came in, which was a very huge contribution into the work. So I've been assured, for example, by Eric that he doesn't want to go to a major donor to do an ask without a programs person in the room across the table from the donor, because it's that level of credibility and that thought leadership that can speak to those realities on the ground. So that's one aspect of it. I think there are other aspects, as I've shared some of the initial ideas around this, that I've been approached in recent weeks even by people from marketing who say, wow, you guys have such great stories to tell. We need to platform those. You've got great insights into this. We need to leverage that. So I think, though, that part of what is in front of us over this season is for us to begin to tell that story better, to sharpen it so that others will know and see that actually, hey, we are in the corridors of power, maybe not unlike an Esther, and we're not just a pretty face. We've got something to really contribute into that space, like she did. She had incredible leadership and influence to actually turn the tide for her people and avert impending genocide in her context. So, other questions, reactions? Come on up, Marcel.
It's not maybe necessarily a question, but it is a comment. when I look at the mission, it's clear like when you take influence, we know that traditionally it is a policy and advocacy. I mean our colleagues in Ottawa. And when it comes to income, within programs and policy division, it's mostly HEA and GAM. And then when it comes to resource planning and impact, it is international programs. And as Miriam has said just now, there is now this trend really to involve everybody to contribute to resource generation, to income generation. So my wish will be that through this process, we work more closely with our colleague from marketing department so that we define clearly how us as program and policy or international program can really contribute to work together with them for, because so far it seems like the lines are not clearly defined, or the rules or the principles are not clearly defined on who take initiative of what and how. So that's just the comment I wanted to make.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, so there's two layers to that. As I would see it, you're right, you could sort of divide this into natural areas that you might have your first contribution or orientation. But the reality is we're really trying to move to, I think in this process, we're going to see ourselves move to a much more integrated model, where the ecosystem, even within PMP, but also with marketing and beyond, it all is interrelated. It's all interwoven. You cannot atomize it so much without risking the fact that, well, you know, there's cultivation aspects of this. There's thought leadership. It's not just, okay, stimulus and response. I'm going to ask you for money and you're going to give. Well, why? You haven't built the evidence. You haven't built the case for it. You haven't cultivated the relationship for it. You haven't told me and shown me, why are you a thought leader? What do you have to say? What is that based on? Well, it's actually based on the fact that, you know, through our international programs, we've got sectoral engagement right down to the community level, but also to the National Ministry of Health level. In stable contexts and in fragile contexts, we are helping stand up the health or WASH infrastructure in different communities, building in resilience. So we're positioned to speak with authority on what it's going to take to improve child well-being. And we've got, you know, programmatic responses. We're developing an evidence base around that. We're engaging with academia to be able to help sort of undergird what it is that we're contributing so that we have investable, replicable models that can be used to scale. So there are real opportunities here as we begin to see, yeah, I may reside in this space, but I actually contribute over here, and I need to have a line of sight into there. And then we need to take that over to our marketers and showcase and share. The more we sort of show what it is that we have, the more they'll start and connect the dots into income, the more they'll actually say, oh yeah, this is a great arrow for this quiver. This is something we could take here. I need to have you in this conversation. Hey, why did we have that presentation there and not think about inviting some of our high net worth donors into the room, because this would be a game changer for moving them along so they see us not just as an organization that does X or Y, but that we're on the cutting edge of solving this aspect of a problem. So we do need to see ourselves in new ways and think about what our contribution is, but also where others don't know how to engage with it. Look, the reality is 300 job descriptions in marketing got changed over the last year. So people are still orienting themselves to what their own job is, let alone what, you know, somebody else is. So let's be expert Sherpas to walk over and say, hey, you know, I think you're in this area. Can we chat? Like, we have this to offer. Maybe we could do this together. Are you the right person? No, that's over here. And let's piece it together. If we wait, we may miss the window altogether. So let's be more active and engaged and do our best that way. Yeah.
Earlier I was ambushed, now I think it's my
See, if I ambush you, then you don't have the chance to ambush me.
Okay, I think it's the link between marketing and the rest of us. it has been kept open and voluntary, and that is kind of difficult. I mean, it depends on me how I relate with market people, and there is no formal institutionalized linkage. It makes it difficult. So that's what I'm looking for. And World Vision, I don't know, in the old days, we used to talk about sponsorship. Sponsorship is dying, it's going to die 10, 15 years ago. And nobody was listening and marketing was not coming into, because that was the easiest thing. So now, we may even be left out if we are not intentionally and institutionally linked. That's one thing that I want to comment. The second one is, are we listening to even ourselves, to the field? Or are we trying to talk over each other? That is always a concern for me, because we have a policy in Canada. We try to put that in the field. Is it also the need of the field, or is it because our governments and our constituencies are saying to us these things, and then we need to do them? So there has to be, I think, a genuine conversation between the two, so that we're not imposing things on each other, but we are working together. The third point thing is on education. I think education, it breaks my heart when I see children growing in displaced areas. And I was in Darfur, and 2003 up to now, they are in the camp. They're not going to school. So if we're not investing in that, we are actually, by default, collaborating with the lack of peace in those places, because the children are being educated by their children to hate the other tribe that put them in that situation, and there is no opportunity for livelihoods. They go into the same cycle. So I think we need to be strong, at least in displaced places, on education.
A 3-point sermon, I love it. Wow. See, give him 10 minutes and that's what he comes up with. Imagine if he had a day. So I'll try and reflect on each of those pieces as I recall them. So in terms of, the second one was, I think, about listening to the field and ensuring that we're not just imposing policy proclamations from the Government of Canada or our own, brilliant insight and jamming it down the throats of the field. I think that's absolutely highlights part of our role, which is, I think, our advocacy, the fact that we have programs and policy integrated. My understanding of our theory of change is that we should be surfacing what we're learning from our field partners, from our exposure to the realities on the ground, and lifting that up so that the government is prioritizing what they are prioritizing. We sometimes have to hold back impulses of the government that they would prioritize things that are good for, maybe political considerations in Canada, but may not be standing up to the realities on the ground. I've seen it personally in Tanzania, some of the ways that our team is really good at holding those things together, weaving them together, where, just a very small example, we were having conversations with women under one tree, men under another tree, is the way that they were doing it, about sexual reproductive health and rights. And the conversation that the men were having, related to, well, why can't our cattle give birth every, they're calving all the time. Why can't our women do the same? And it was like, oh, wow, okay, but this is the starting point. But one of our team shared an example from their perspective, saying, look, when you're actually, and I'm not saying this is a perfect example, but I think it helps kind of how do we mediate in this space. They said, when you're planting your crops, do you plant your corn here and here and here and here and here? No, why not? Well, what would happen? Well, they would, compete for, and there wouldn't be enough nutrition, there wouldn't be enough health. They said, likewise, healthy timing and spacing of pregnancy is important, for the life of the children, but also for the life of the mother. And so it was a way in which it's bringing about something that is consistent with our reflections on healthy timing and spacing, but contextually appropriate in a way that people were actually nodding and going, oh, the light bulbs were coming on. So I'm trying to recall. So the first point was just very quickly, what was it? Remind me what it was about.
Formal linkages.
Formal linkages. So I would just say, point noted, it actually is, that's some of our work, is to figure out how do we forge those. We have a few of them, but how do we formalize linkages so that there are natural engagement and staging grounds to have these conversations with marketing. And then the third one, Mary? I'll look to you, not Harry. He doesn't even remember. He's saying, I don't know, it's brilliant, but I don't remember. Education. You're talking about education, you're just basically speaking to the critical nature in this mass displacement and long displacement, and I would just say amen, brother, preach it. So,
Can I just
yeah,
interrupt for
Harry
one
and then Alana.
So while this is a great conversation, I think.
Can you come up here
contributes-
just so it's
Sorry.
captured, and also maybe this camera.
This is a great
I lost that. It's okay, we're done with that.
a great conversation, and maybe we'll stop it, I don't know. And it contributes to what LT is doing. But while you're listening to any other questions and Jamie's conversation with you, could you jot down 2 really critical things that you think we should be doing in the next while as P&P within this context? And just leave it on your table. We're going to take those and actually add it to the wall with the LT discussion. So there are on most tables, but not in the very back, I'll bring them pens and some markers, some sticky notes.
Great.
Doing or stop doing even.
Or stop doing, sure.
And Alana, if you can come in and share what you wanted to. Let me just, while you come up, I will just reserve comment on the sponsorship is dying comment that you made. I think that there may be life yet. So the reality is we shouldn't bury our head in the sand and pretend like nothing is going on. We need to bring our best thinking to bear on. If there's something there that we can resurrect and breathe life into, great. Alana.
Actually, Miriam kind of stole my thunder, but I think it would be really empowering for me as someone in P&P to have some rigor around what we're not going to do. When you put up those slides, there's so much rich opportunity, and World Vision is large, and we've got a lot of smart people. But I think it's really empowering if we know as a team, as a division, that there are 3 things that we are pursuing passionately and aggressively. And that gives us the permission to say no to some really good opportunities, but it allows us to excel, to perform with excellence at some great opportunities. So I think I would appreciate to see that kind of courage from leadership to say, we agree for this period of time that we may not focus on this thing. And it may not be education, it may be education, it's a fantastic thing, but we're also hearing lots of other sectors, lots of other spaces, so we could have some definition around that. I think that would be really, really helpful.
So I would say on that, yeah, it's a fair point, and that's why we brought up the fact about what things are we going to stop. I also know that even when we press the brake pedal, it often seems like our pads are worn, and we aren't very good at that. Globally, we have really said that there are 5 sectors that we're focusing on. It doesn't mean we have to take on all 5 within World Vision Canada. So we're going to have to, look at that. We're also looking at refining and limiting the number of core program models. I will say though, it is difficult, and it's not just a leadership thing. It's all of us figuring out how do we articulate what are the things, like help us capture what you feel we should stop doing. But then I know even with the partnership, it's this interesting thing. We say, hey, you need to stop, you need to stop, you need to stop doing certain things. And then they stop doing something and they say, oh, anything but that. Oh, anything but that. Oh, anything but that. So we are, it's difficult because we want life in all its fullness for children. And we know it's complex and there are so many things. So I don't pretend, and I'm not going to act like we're going to be able to flip a switch and automatically stop some things. But it would be good to hear what themes come out. What things are we feeling like, you know what, this isn't something. We're going to be a leader in the sector or the space. We're not going to be number 1 or number 2. Maybe we should work together with others. But let me point out one example. We did decide to stop investing in the Nutrition Center of Expertise. That's not saying we're stepping away entirely from nutrition, but one of the things I'm exploring is saying, do we forge a more formal partnership across the board globally with Nutrition International? If they're the experts in that, if we're saying we don't have enough to spread it across everything, is that something that we do there? While we still have people who are engaging in it, is it a lighter touch so that we can leverage that? We stopped Canadian programs. So there are things that we have stopped, and I think we also need to give ourselves some credit for the difficult choices that we've made to free up resources towards what we're trending toward. Okay, I'll take one or two more, and then, okay, Martin.
So, thanks very much. I think what struck me when Alana spoke and when we said we need to stop doing things, and yes, we need to be driven by field realities, but we're also hearing a whole lot about being audience focused. And I think we need to listen to that intently when our marketing colleagues talk about what excites Canadians, and when, same thing in the government space, what excites the government. We can't just say, well, that excites you, and actually we know what works in the field. And I think that's a really fine balance that we'll have to walk internally and that we'll have to walk externally. Otherwise, we're talking in an echo chamber and we're talking about what we know works, and we have some sort of secret sauce discovered because we're global and because we're amazing and all these things. And I say this to myself as much as to anyone, I think a little bit of humility in all these conversations works. And yes, we're field driven, but we're also audience focused. So how do we manage that, I think, very difficult balance sometimes, and listen to especially the marketers when they say, this will work this way, finding a way to listen to that and to work with that in a way that honors that we're field driven. I think if we can find that balance, that's exciting.
Yeah, I think we hear a lot about customer centricity, and I think that how do we find concentricity? How do we find the child focused, the community focused, along with the customer focused, and I'd rather consider it partner focused, and how do we find sort of an infinity loop of value around those, where you see what the donor is interested in, you see what the needs of the children are, you try and find the intersection point, you deliver on what the donor's expectations are, maybe over-deliver, showcase the evidence, it helps children, and then their needs change, and then you shift that back and you invite people into this journey of mutual transformation. So, good. Okay, I think just before we conclude here, Harry, I don't know if you want to show the other slide of kind of process, what the other opportunity is to engage, or whether we should just leave that. We won't be doing it now.
We're getting it.
We'll do it this way. Okay. All right. Well, listen, so as we do this, your contribution doesn't end here. Write down what you have, share your thoughts, share them with your leaders, share them with me, email it. We'll also, in this process, be finding different intervals and check-in points to kind of say, hey, here's where we're at, here's what we're thinking, and do a reality check with you. And you can bring some feedback to us then. But along the way, if you have ideas, thoughts, considerations on what we should stop doing or start doing, we would welcome them. Okay? Thanks all. Blessings on your day. Please keep us in your prayer as we try and work this through, that we come to a place that's really positions us for the best contribution PNP can make in support of child well-being. All right? Cheers.